so I guess I'm gonna react to this. Hey folks, not something I like to do a lot on this channel, reacting to other videos, but I was listening to a bit of the PetaPixel podcast. I'm actually a week behind their show. I really love their photography and cinematography conversations. I cannot recommend highly enough that you go out there and you subscribe to this show if you care at all about cameras and photos and video. But they're also photography guys, and I feel like a lot of our photo professionals start missing some of the finer elements of mobile photography when we start talking about smartphone cameras. And this really cropped up in their most recent episode following the reveal, the announcement of the Galaxy S24 Ultra from Samsung. They got to go and cover Samsung Unpacked. While I started listening to this podcast, I felt, like, hey, maybe I can contribute some to this conversation, and I set up a little just quick reaction video setup. So let's see what they have to say, and I'll pop in with a few extra thoughts if I feel like maybe they're missing something.
Well, thanks for sharing, guys. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Let's move on to, let's talk about this concept.
Ooh, a concept.
Is it enough?
Is it enough?
By itself to see either just software or AI features
AI, big bunny rabbit
in
ears,
a new smartphone or camera or whatever? Is that enough to warrant a new model, in your opinion? And the reason I ask this,
there's a reason,
as you guys know, I'll let the audience know why I'm asking, is because Samsung's Galaxy S24 Ultra had basically no hardware changes. The only major hardware change from the camera perspective was actually losing the 10x zoom and going down to a 5x zoom, right?
You say it so negatively.
He does. He says it so negatively. Now, this is one of those problems that, again, someone who is focused on proper, legit cameras might miss some of those other architectural differences on why Samsung has made this change. There are reasons why Samsung has stepped down from a 10x zoom to a 5x zoom. And these are exactly the kind of guys that when they're talking about other cameras, they don't care about the X's, right? They're talking about focal lengths and equivalency and, how does this compare against other features or other cameras? And it would be nice if we didn't just shrug off. That's a pretty significant change. And if you understand why Samsung made that change, then you would understand the S24 Ultra a little bit better.
But they improved the screen too. The display is much nicer. And the case for it is also a different material.
Titanium,
and I think it's
just
nice
like
too.
the iPhone they
But
praise.
as far as just pure camera goes, it's all AI.
It's all AI except for a brand new telephoto sensor that I'm sure Samsung had a reason to use a different telephoto sensor with a different equivalent focal length lens.
Software stuff. So
software stuff.
Do you think that's enough?
I mean, I think we have to separate cameras and smartphones in a way because they are very different devices. Because we look at a smartphone and there's so much to look at on them. I mean, they're mind-boggling, and there's still a lot to learn. But we try to really focus on the cameras and the lenses as opposed to all the other stuff.
You're trying to focus on the camera and the lenses. You would maybe want to point out that the reason why Samsung has gone from 10x to 5x is because they've used a larger sensor. And a larger sensor is better at soaking up light, but that changes your equivalent focal length. So it reduces the amount of reach on that sensor, but it makes that sensor so much more useful in mixed lighting conditions, in darker or dimmer conditions. It is a significant upgrade to photo IQ with the compromise of having a little less reach. This is actually one of those things where these guys are so knowledgeable about photography. I don't care what they have to say about the smartphone-y stuff, like, does the assistant get my Google searches right? I have plenty of outlets that are going to cover that. I would really love to see them kind of focus on these conversations in their podcast a little bit more like they focus on camera reviews for their YouTube channel. Just show me the nuts and bolts of what you can really create with these things after you've taken some time to get familiar with how a different phone camera performs in different situations.
I mean, Samsung did update a lot of their translation software, their handwriting to text, their ability to format conversations or change the tone and mood of your notes and your speeches and stuff.
See, I don't really care.
I mean, there's
what
a lot of
they have to say
that there that we
that.
kind of just were like, well, we're not talking about it because that's out of the scope of our video. at the same time, I think phones are kind of on this yearly recycle path. I mean, honestly, did Apple really do that much with the 15? I mean, we got a new lens.
Much in terms of hardware.
Oh, there wasn't so much in terms of hardware for the iPhone. But I'm sure Apple did more. Let's see what they have to say.
Not much in
I think
terms
the
of hardware.
processor bump made a huge difference with that in terms of a lot of the functionality. That did seem to be the big thing there. I mean, I think we can just kind of divide it in terms of what's happening on device and what's happening off device.
Okay, so two points there. An Apple processor bump. Processor bumps are just kind of a stock talking point for a lot of our smartphone upgrades. This is a major aspect of, this phone is better than last year's phone, and look at all these unlabeled bar graphs and these percentages, it's so much better. But when we just kind of casually throw out like, oh, Apple did something really crazy with their new processor, what are they doing that is so dependent on their new processor that they couldn't have accomplished on last year's phone? And that to me is a critical aspect and one of the major differences that we can get into. We can get deep in the weeds when we talk about iPhones versus other Android devices, because at the same time, we've seen massive processor capability improvements over the last 3 years in Android land. What Qualcomm and MediaTek have been doing year over year over year has been very exciting, and this year is particularly different, where on top of some CPU and GPU gains, we're also very aggressively pushing neural core machine learning and AI capabilities, something Apple hasn't really contributed at all to this kind of content creation conversation.
I think Samsung's is much less compelling when they're saying like, fire those images off to our servers. We're going to then generate something generally badly that it can paste into
generally
this
badly
image.
is also pretty fun.
And a similar thing with Google. And I'm sure so much of this functionality could be done on older devices because it's not using the camera's hardware in order to do it. In that case, that's not very compelling.
Yeah, we'll want to see, because again, this is where we're in total agreement. I feel Samsung completely fumbled the conversation for this year's Unpacked. They overhyped a new era of mobile AI, and then half of their presentation was wheeling a Google rep out on stage to talk about Gemini, which to Jordan's point here, absolutely spot on. We're going to be seeing a lot of those capabilities show up server side on other phones. But if we lived with a Galaxy S24 Ultra and we really shot with a Galaxy S24 Ultra, I'm sure we could point to some of the other software improvements and the other things that these machine learning cores, these neural cores, can contribute to your photography and your video.
To me, if they do, say like, hey, because of this new Snapdragon 8 version that we're running, this lets us do generative fill on device without having to access the cloud.
Okay, I mean, like, let's really shoot for the moon here, guys. Generative content-aware generative fill is a pretty heavy compute task. We're still kind of getting our sea legs on those kinds of plugins and capabilities and editing tools on massive workstations with beefy GPUs using Adobe's newest plugins. This is what I mean. I feel like camera guys kind of get lost in this mobile conversation because there's so much more that AI actually does contribute to the image that your phone spits out. We're dealing with the bleeding edge of quad Bayer sensor technology, stacked sensors, new pixel binning types of tech, and we've been doing a lot of this since the Huawei Kirin chips, where we're using our neural cores for not only for better post-processing, better HDR compositing, stacking DNG files, but also for better subject and scene detection. It's one of the main guiding aspects that is improving face and eye detection in smartphone autofocus. In some ways where you can kind of point to some of the recent advancements in phone performance, giving us better, sharper, more accurate subject and motion detection than many of our more expensive, proper mirrorless cameras.
Or do it quicker or something like that. If that was the case, then that's much more interesting to me. And I think that
I agree on the content
justify
it.
Because like Apple's new processor unlocked a lot of, being able to do portrait mode in any photo in post if it generated a depth map.
Do you see that little Throwaway comment right there. So, okay, we got an example. I was critical. I said, well, what is it about Apple's processor that's giving us something new? And we got an example. So you can take an iPhone and you can shoot a regular photo, and there's a fancy LiDAR kit on the back of the phone, which someone please correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, but didn't the iPhone 14 Pro also have some kind of LiDAR assembly? I'm not sure. When you have that depth information, I'm not sure you need a ton of compute power to make a portrait mode photo out of a regular photo if it knows the depth. I'm kind of reaching here. On the top of my head, we saw some really interesting work on the Nokia 9, which had that weird, funky 5-camera assembly, and it generated this depth map, and you could turn any photo into a multi-staged, a good focus fall off representation of a portrait mode photo. So if you don't have the LiDAR though, or let's say the iPhone in the conditions that you're shooting in can't generate a usable depth map, what do? You need better AI subject detection. I kind of want to show this off here real quick as just a tangent. I'm going to pull this up right here. So this is a phone using last year's top-of-the-line Android processor. The phone is released this year, but it's using last year's hardware. It's a very inexpensive phone, especially on the current sales. It's a really cheap phone, and I'm in the photo mode. I'm not in the portrait mode. So I'm just going to kind of hold this up. Let me get the volume rocker. I'm going to hold this up here and kind of just get my face in the reflection on the camera module, and I'm going to click that. I'm probably making a really funny face just because I'm talking to the camera as I'm doing this. And then I'm just gonna long press. I'm just gonna hold, and it detects me, and it just did this little PNG transparency cutout that I can save up in a little doc. I can send this to other apps on the phone if I want to send it to like Sketchpad or some other photo editing app, or I can use that to generate a portrait mode shot from a regular image. That is an example of using the processor to accomplish a compute-heavy task, not getting all of the extra depth information from a LiDAR sensor to then contribute to editing that photo. Apple is solving this issue not with better AI or with a beefier CPU. They're solving that problem by using LiDAR. So what is it about that new photo mode that can't be accomplished on older iPhones that also have the ability to track depth using some kind of LiDAR-like location or distance solution?
Allowed it to do some of the video capability. I still think it's stacking more than 2 video frames per frame.
Yeah, that's probably
in order to get the dynamic range that thing is recording. And that all seems
especially
like
with like
processor.
The new,
that seems like hardware to me.
Prologue.
Where Samsung's like, if you move this person into the air, we're going to throw it up on the cloud and then again generate something.
Right, but let's point that out. Like combining frames of data is one kind of very heavy GPU compute task. Moving a subject in a photo and filling in the data behind it is a very different kind of learned software, machine learning kind of solution. So I would not put those up as saying like, well, they're comparable. You need a beefy processor for one and the other is server side. We're kind of moving our examples around a little bit in a way that isn't showcasing. Again, we want to stick to the question. The question being asked here is it enough? Are these new software features enough? And we haven't heard examples yet of what is new on device for the Galaxy in terms of camera performance.
The results aren't great at this point, and it is going to get better.
Well, that's before Chris jumps in here, that's the part I actually want to touch on because I'm confused about this. So if there's anyone listening to this who could maybe explain this better, because I'm not getting an answer out of anyone that from the companies, but like if you look at our examples and I've linked to the review so that you can actually see the picture outside of YouTube. But there's one that Chris took of like he tried to move a guy away from a bench into the middle of a room, and that came out horrible, like truly bad.
Yeah, that looks
like it looks
rough.
Not right
Nightmare
at all.
Fuel.
Yeah, it's not good. The person that he was standing near is now a blob.
And I just kind of want to jump in here because they're totally correct. And this is one of the problems because, like I said, again, I'm not impressed with Samsung's presentation, so focused on Google Gemini and cloud-based AI. But every tool we've ever had in this kind of AI smart creation space started out crappy. And then, as the company behind that feature soaked up more information and analyzed more photos, the tool gets a bit better. And then our artists understand better where they can use that tool to get the best results. Something like a moving subject. I mean, you can see the motion blur of the subject shot in a really kind of shaded, shadowy, or dim conditions with high dynamic elements with sunshine kind of in the back of this photo. That's a really complicated and very difficult edit to pull off in one simple gesture. I don't know of many photo editors that would look at that shot and think, I have one tool that can move this person and fill in a busy and complex scene behind them. And that tool is also going to be aware of how to move the shadows falling off of that person's feet. What Samsung did here is what Samsung spit out here is definitely unusable, but I'm not sure there is a solution that we could incorporate into a workflow that would be that easy to use. This stuff is incredibly difficult to get right, and our current AI tools still often get it wrong. Now, you can tell it's a really complicated way to edit, and it's really hard to do because Apple isn't trying to do it at all. Apple's gonna wait until Google figures this out better, and then after a generation of that proving itself in the market, Apple will invent content-aware fill, but our tech reviewers are only gonna remember like the first week experience on Samsung devices. They won't follow the evolution of this kind of a feature, this kind of mode, while Apple is just completely sitting on the sidelines. They aren't contributing anything to this kind of workflow.
Of mess. And like, so it's not
with
good.
3 feet.
So like the idea, with 3 feet, with the idea being that this gets better over time. How is this getting better? How is that going to happen? I can't tell it that they did this wrong. And like the other thing too, like with the reflections, they didn't work nearly at all. You can't tell it there's a reflection here and your correction is bad.
Okay. I can't make this video long enough to break down generative AI models and parameters. The cloud doesn't know anything. These tools acquire information to regurgitate results based on prompts or actions from the user. The more data it can analyze, the less likely it is to hallucinate. So it's just such a simple and pithy question, like, how is it going to know? But I mean, honestly, that's about as good as I can explain right now. You just kind of have to understand. It's something that a lot of us techies are going to have to re-educate ourselves on, is just this current trend of AI needs a bit more explaining. And that was a question that kind of showed off not a great understanding of where we are with server-side solutions.
Mm-hmm. So like, how is it learning? How can it possibly learn if I'm not telling it did poorly?
So isn't that why they want to do cloud-based stuff? I mean, you can look at it nefariously, and yes, I mean, like anything, they want to collect a lot of data.
But how would the cloud know? How would the cloud know that it failed?
But how does it know?
Because you're feeding it data.
I wonder if it sends something back that says, like, if we choose don't save after it gives us something.
Actually,
if it's saying, like,
good point too.
That's a negative. But yeah, I totally, like, there should be a little, like, Google Maps, you know, how did we do today?
Bad. But they're looking at results. The engineers are looking at the photos. They know.
You think that the engineers are going to look at the millions of attempts?
No. They're looking.
Oh, you see what just happened there? We went from a pretty cogent point, a pretty interesting conversation point to sidetrack into kind of reductive. That was really reductive what just happened. Do you think they're going to look at all of these millions of photos? And no, obviously not. But what do you think all these server farms are churning up right now? All of the big tech companies that have been pouring money into ridiculous racks of CPUs and GPUs. NVIDIA's stock is to the moon because we're trying to automate large data sets and we're trying to build on the information that we've been accumulating for years now. This is not a new aspect of visual search information. It's the new step in making a more consumer-facing solution to spit out some kind of automated content based on a very simple query or a very simple action. We've been in this space for decades now looking at image data. So no, a human engineer is not sitting down and analyzing the output of millions and millions of photos. But Samsung is on a journey now, and it's very lucrative to have your own bucket of image data. And that's going to kick off here with the S24 Ultra. As we've seen from how these other core frameworks operate, I would imagine that we'll see pretty quick iteration and improvement on what Samsung is going to put out there in front of consumers to get them excited about future iterations of these ideas.
Looking at the shots that they've taken, and they're like, oh, this really isn't that good. And they're like, hey, we found like 3 instances where it was pretty effective. Let's put that in our presentation. But, you know, clearly they're trying to collect data. They're trying to find out, how can we improve this? It is going to get better.
Correct.
I mean, the question isn't, did they do a good job? The question is it enough to warrant a new model? And I think, yeah, I mean, in the smartphone world, sure. I mean, Google did the same thing. They absolutely did improve their...
So, well, first, just thank you for getting us back on track. The main question of the video, was it enough? This is an interesting idea. And now we need to see, does it have merit? And will consumers really contribute to it? And can Samsung iterate on it? But you have to start somewhere.
Hardware. That was
hardware.
nice.
They did the most this year of the 3 companies, and actually.
But next year,
hardware.
are they going to? Probably not. You know what I mean? Like, you know, I feel like we're always stuck in this every year a new phone kind of world. That's the way it is.
Okay, we got to take another quick stop here, because we got back on track and then we kind of fell immediately out of what the question they're trying to talk about is here. I feel I can contribute to this also, where I really like Pixel phones. I've been working with Team Pixel for the last several years. They've supplied phones for me to share my thoughts and share reviews. They've never contributed or requested any content be edited in any of my reviews. And I've never sought out any of that kind of feedback from Google directly, the Pixel team, or any associated PR. The flip side is I have a messy and complicated relationship with Samsung PR. I kind of hate Samsung these days. And I'm fairly confident that their PR feels very similar. They don't like me much either. So it's always like acid in my mouth whenever someone makes me defend Samsung. I really don't like it. I don't want to do it. Google's main hardware upgrades were pretty modest looking at the Pixel 7 to the Pixel 8. Like our new main sensor, I really think it's just a faster readout variant of the same Samsung sensor we've used since the 6 Pro, but it's optically extremely similar to the 6 and the 7 Pro. The telephoto, similarly, is the same sensor we had as the 7 Pro, but with a slightly wider aperture, which actually contributes to us losing just a touch of the real optical zoom. But again, it's not a night and day difference if it's just slightly better at soaking up light. The main physical difference here is the ultra-wide now gets a higher res quad Bayer sensor, and that is an improvement. That is really cool. All 3 sensors match for high resolution output and have much better support for RAW files. What Google has done is definitely appreciated, but it kind of only catches the Pixel up to other brands like Xiaomi and Oppo and Vivo. And again, matched camera sensors, high resolution output, all of the support matching across all camera sensors. Now, we're going to say there was a big hardware difference from Pixel 7 to Pixel 8 because of an ultra-wide, then why not showcase how the new telephoto on the S24 Ultra is a much more significant upgrade for using your telephoto in more challenging lighting conditions and with better photo and video IQ. And where is my Vivo? And these companies are using much bigger camera sensors across the board than what Apple is including in the most expensive iPhones. I mean, if I'm going to be really snarky, guys, I thought we liked to focus on the cameras and the lenses.
And like you say, people are maybe holding on to their older stuff because a lot of people are going to look at this and be like, I don't need the generative AI, or I'll wait till it's better. And that's perfectly valid. But at the same time, you want to start collecting data. You want to start getting examples. You want to be able to learn from the photos that are going through the cloud. And I'm sure they're absolutely analyzing the photos that are going through the cloud that you submit, if you choose to submit it. They're also give you an option if you don't want to submit them, right? Yeah. But no, I mean, it makes sense why they're doing it to me and how they want to improve the product. And the potential is very interesting. Apple has to date not really chosen to go in on that.
No, not
right?
at all.
And maybe they will at some point at all, but they might, or they want to keep it just camera based. But, you know, Samsung did improve the portrait mode in a big way. I think that's
neat
much
that
better.
You actually tested that because
that's neat that you tested a feature on the phone. It's just real neat, guys. Just pretty neat.
It's like the
camera's faster. The camera's faster. The AI processing through cloud was way quicker than the Google Pixel
Samsung's
Pro 8 Pro. So, you know, I think there are benefits here that we're seeing. Time will tell if that's something that people are really going to key in. That's the question. Is the community going to start playing with these features and say, oh, this is cool, I find this useful? Or are they going to play with them and be like, this is janky and gimmicky? That we still have to see, but you got to put it out there to find out what people are going to respond.
Yes, thank you. Spot on. Okay, that actually helps answer the question posed at the beginning of this segment. As another tangent, I'm sorry, I'm really long-winded. In my phone reviews, my top award is a new phone is worthy of a 1-year upgrade. It's the new phone is so good this year, you'll want to flip your phone from last year to get it. Going from 2022 to 2023, we saw huge improvements to performance and battery life and some really exciting camera developments. Now, going from 2023 to 2024, it's a much more nuanced conversation. There are definitely tangible improvements, but they're not as clearly or as dramatically felt by the user behind these phone cameras. So I'm not going to be outright awarding those 1-year upgrades as frequently as I was the year before. Especially because we know that the average length of phone ownership is over 2 years, and more people are trying to push past 3 years with a phone than any of the people who might flip their phone every single year. So the software experience on device is absolutely crushing where we were with the Galaxy S21 series. That would be an example of the evolutionary effect, and it's kind of iterative year to year to year, but of how neural processing is making our smartphone cameras better. Better post-processing, definitely better demosaicing on these quad Bayer sensors. We're seeing all of these companies now embracing crop zoom and pixel restructuring, improvements to our manual and our pro modes, including higher resolution capture and log video. And of course, like I've mentioned several times here, significantly better subject and scene detection, not just for our autofocus, but also for our metering to accomplish some of these HDR effects.
You made mention, sorry, Jordan, I wanted to jump in quickly.
Just jump in.
He mentioned something while we were out. It's that I wanted to bring up, which is like the whole reason that they're probably doing their own backed up versions of this stuff rather than using existing AI tech is very likely the idea that legally it's kind of hinky right now.
Oh, it's a lot.
So like
hinky.
if they make
actually,
you agree to their terms and conditions, and now they started taking all the pictures that you're sending because you agreed to it, they are now insulated from possible litigation, which is maybe why this isn't as good as some other stuff, is because they're starting from scratch.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that's a very good point. I wouldn't dismiss it because so many companies are starting from scratch. We know that Google and Microsoft and Amazon, they want to be the cloud server provider, but then every company is going to have to build their own unique tool sets in those AI frameworks. So yeah, that's actually a really important point. We have not yet set enough legal precedent for copyright. I'm sure a lot of people who are into this conversation have very passionate feelings about copyright law and DMCA and takedowns and how we protect intellectual property. It's a huge mess. But in the current framework of how we protect content that we believe has a monetary value, big tech has just run through this conversation without really testing their claims with court verdicts and with laws. So now, yes, we need to accomplish some of that and see how do we protect our intellectual property? What does it mean for the future of copyright? And if I were a massive corporation like a Samsung, I would be anxious about just piggybacking on someone else's bucket of data when I have so many users that are likely to contribute very quickly to me improving my own AI tool sets.
If anyone, that's your theory, right, Chris? And I kind of agree with it.
Well, that would make sense, right? I mean, well, we'll see what happens. How much are they? They're obviously using a lot of Google's technology, but how much of it is going to be theirs?
Well, Gemini, the thing that's at the core of a lot of this, which is Google tech, the way they actually made it is like you can use Google's database, or you can take Gemini and plug it on your own system and feed it your own data. So you're only needing to license the actual AI, and the database itself can be specific to anyone.
I mean, look, Adobe's generative fill sucked when it first came out. It only worked on fence posts and skies, right? And it's already gotten better. So, yeah,
Adobe did the same thing. They used their own library of license, like because they own stock footage. So they had a lot more data to start with. Samsung's even, I would say, in a worse place because they don't have that worse starting point.
And again, I mean, that's one of those things where, yes, we should point it out. Samsung's in a worse place. But again, making me defend Samsung. Everybody's in a worse place. Like Google has a terms of service where if you've been using Google Photos and Cloud and all this stuff, they can probably piggyback on that data better. And we've seen, especially over the last 4 generations of Pixel phones, Google Pixel photo processing is dominating whenever we do blind taste tests in our camera showdowns. They have arrived at a photo processing style that is very consumer friendly. People really like the look of those photos. And to Chris's point, Adobe started out really rough too. I don't believe anyone would have tried that person walking shot with such a busy background on any first generation Adobe tool and said, yeah, see, this is the future of content aware fill. I guess we just need to pack it in, folks. Adobe can't get anything right. So, no argument. I feel like Samsung has completely fumbled this unpacked in describing what makes their products unique. I think it was a massive disappointment. But it is also phrased in a conversation where what is the alternative? Who else is trying to contribute to this? Who's doing it better? And I don't know that there's a good answer to say, in one clean gesture, I'm going to cut out a person from a scene and have a phone fill in this background and have it be perfect so that people can't see what's happening behind it. This is the evolution of features like Magic Eraser on the Pixel. Magic Eraser is really good, but it's not foolproof because the phone has to guess what would look like something that was behind the subject and then cut out that individual and fill in that data. This is an evolutionary process that has to iterate over time. It's not going to come out the gate just swinging and just be perfect.
Anyway,
so everybody's rushing to collect as much data as possible and make the product better. So
get that tasty
data. I think for cameras, I find it actually more disappointing. I'm not so disappointed by a phone every year because they do make changes and you kind of ignore a cycle. With cameras, we have seen sometimes where a camera comes out and it's been 2 years and a lot of them can be just basic evolutions or minor changes. So, and I think AI is a perfectly good reason to launch a smartphone. Sure.
I just keep going back to the original question, which was like, is it enough? Specifically with the Samsung event.
Thank you. Get us back on the event. Get us back on the question. Is it enough? Have we seen enough? And these guys, one of the reasons why I like their show so much is they're kind of like me. They're very easily sidetracked. Squirrel! And then you want to talk about something else. And I'm absolutely guilty of that same.
And one other thing that we're seeing a lot is is it exclusive? Because I would say like a quarter of the presentation was about Google features that are already available in the Pixel 8 and Pixel 8 Pro and are probably going to roll out to everything that runs Google software, which is all smartphones in the future, as long as the processors can handle it. But yeah, like circle to search and things like that. I mean, that is something I do think Apple might have a leg up on, is generally when they're talking about a feature, it is something that is exclusive to their platform.
I thought he was going to say Apple has a leg up on something like this. And you're like, Apple definitely does not have a leg up on any of this kind of computational software or search or AI kinds of processing. But this is one of the things that I get really worried about is these kinds of conversations we haven't really spent a lot of time talking about the Galaxy S24 Ultra and whether it brings those kinds of improvements over the S23 Ultra on the software and the processing and the performance side. We're getting stuck. We're getting deep in the weeds, and we're getting locked in on, did Samsung's presentation cover enough? And that is a very different conversation because, like I said, Samsung Unpacked was super weak sauce this year. But what about the S24 Ultra? What about really living with it? You know, earlier in the chat, there were other, it was mentioned that there were other significant improvements that weren't covered by the presentation. So we're not really grading the phone. We're asking, was the presentation enough?
And I'm actually curious because I didn't watch the Pixel 8
you should have watched the Pixel
press
8
announcement. I'd love to go back and watch that and see if there were similar things where they were really flaunting features that were not exclusive to the Pixel.
There was some of that too. A lot of like, hey, this is video boost and also sort of stylized photo editing. But at the same time, we saw some of the processing improvements on things like pixel resampling for better crop zoom. So you should give the Pixel presentation a view.
Yeah, but the alternative is don't release a phone, right?
Okay, that was blunt. I loved it. Then don't do anything. Well played.
Yeah.
With any of this technology. I mean, so I guess what I'm saying is, look, I'm not saying is the S24 a revolutionary device or anything. No, and in a lot of cases, it is optically very similar to the 23 Ultra. Although I do like the 5x zoom personally.
Thank
I know
you.
I'm probably in the minority there.
Oh, okay. So don't be in the minority there. Just explain why you like it. The 10x zoom on the S23 Ultra was such a dinky little sensor that was only really usable in great light, and images, the quality fell apart so fast. People should be excited to sacrifice a little bit of that marketing zoom reach and get much better image quality. The zoom on Samsung, like Google and Xiaomi and Vivo, is now far more engaging as an indoor candid photography solution. You've got cozy lighting, but you want to get a moment from across the living room. You know, someone's laughing really nice or you're going in for a hug. It's so much more discreet than shoving the main wide camera in someone's face to get a good indoor shot. It's okay to like it. You just kind of tell people. We like to talk about cameras and lenses. Like, there's a very good reason to do what Samsung has done here.
But you have to get your foot into this door and show that you're competing and show that you're using the same kind of capabilities, or you do nothing.
If they do nothing, this goes back to a news story we just covered, they will continue to lose market share.
Yeah, Samsung.
Right.
I can't remember. I could be wrong. I could be misremembering. But I felt to me like there was a time where Samsung actually did skip a year with the Galaxy S series phones. And that felt weird. Even though
would have felt weird.
I'm now complaining maybe that there's not enough on this. You also can't afford to skip a year.
That's a very good point. You can't afford to skip a year. And to my knowledge, someone please correct me if I'm missing something here, I don't believe Samsung has ever just skipped a year in total. It would help, guys, if occasionally you had some Android shooters to fill in some of these knowledge gaps. So individual phone models can get blurry. There have been transitions in Samsung's lineup, just like any other brand. Like calling a Galaxy Note now is called an S Ultra. Still a Note, still has an S Pen, and it really hasn't changed from previous Notes. That's just a feature of marketing. But even trying to give you the benefit of the doubt, like, oh, I seem to remember there was a Galaxy S. I don't believe that's ever happened. Maybe the omission you could be thinking of was the year after the Note 7 exploded, the batteries went kaboom, Samsung did not release a Note 8 to follow it, but there are still Galaxy S8s and Galaxy S9s that kind of bridged that gap before Samsung brought the Note back. But that's just it. It's like you're mentioning a specific series of phones, Galaxy S. So that's not a thing. Samsung has never just taken a whole year off. And you're right. But yeah, that would look bad if they left the market for a year. I mean, it would probably look worse than a camera review journalist just making up an entire missing year of Samsung phones, because that would look pretty bad too. So there you go.
It just doesn't look good for you. So
it doesn't look good for you.
We did it. We had a conversation.
Yeah, Jordan, I have a question. Why do you...
Oh, man. Jordan was so close. Did you see him? He's like, okay, we're done with this. I want to move on. And then he just gets dragged right back in. All right, let's see where they're going to take this.
You think video on Android is so not good?
And there were some interesting comments.
Okay, we got to stop right there for just a second, too. There is... I really do. I really do love this podcast, and I really want people to follow this show and to support these guys, especially if you're a camera enthusiast at all. But this is a cute little thing that happens on the show where when there hasn't been enough Apple praise, we have to sneak in a little line, like we're talking about editing and video, but MacBooks are so much better than Windows laptops and those Windows laptop fans. Or one of their other common tropes, it could be a drinking game and you'd get drunk pretty quick, but iPhone video is so much more frame consistent than shooting video on a Pixel. And that's a fair point if we're talking about video comparison. But you see, the reason why we're kind of changing topics a little bit, there is no AI capability to praise on an iPhone. So we have to reach a little. We have to kind of goalpost shove just a bit so we can find something else to praise Apple on right now. I love this podcast, but they're really at their strongest when they're talking about cameras and lenses, not always phones and computers. You just kind of have to eye roll your way through a few of these little tangents.
It's about how some of the core functionality of Android might just be cooked into the operating system, like the variable frame rate thing I've been lamenting. Mm-hmm. Someone said no, that is an aspect of Android that's baked right into it. I do wonder if that's the case. I also feel they're almost letting it's not, if that's a huge priority for you, I think so many of those people are going to iOS because it's had that reputation now for 5 years. And just if you care about video, iPhone is the place to go. I wonder if they're just look, we're not going to get that market anyways. Let's dump our resources into things like photo or,
AI,
smart AI features that can actually move the needle for us a little bit more.
Okay. So, one, it's always a mistake to talk about companies as if they're individual people. Mr. Samsung looked at the data and says, well, people don't care about video. That's not how we accomplish fair and consistent comparisons between different devices and different manufacturers. There is a bit to unpack here. Android manufacturers care very much about the consumer video experience, and it has been a little rough and it has been tricky finding the phones that do a better job with more professional grade video capabilities in those situations, especially where you maybe would want to mix footage with a proper camera and with a smartphone. But if we're talking about the last 5 years, I'd also say it was a bit of a coin flip, which would mess you up more, having some frame rate drift or Apple's tone mapping that screwed up your exposure settings. I expect that guys who really know their cameras, we're getting ready for a part of the conversation where, of course, they're about to praise the Sony Xperia line as kind of having the best of both worlds. Razor consistent frame rates, color and tone profiles taken directly from Alpha and Venice cameras, and the highest bitrate of any camera video short of Apple's Prologue. I'm sure we're about to get some of that here to help the audience understand the different options that might be available.
I wonder if that's the case.
It's so strange to me if that is true, because a lot of early content creators who are just deciding that they want to do this are going to use their phone to make
Your phone is
video
your
content.
Is your first starter
Without
camera
a doubt. If whether or not that's on TikTok or Instagram or on YouTube,
or making
they need a
short films,
camera.
not just
And if the camera is
disposable
not
stuff.
fantastic, it just seems so strange to me. It's just a missed opportunity.
If the camera is not fantastic, it would be a missed opportunity, like not telling your audience if you really care about getting a great phone camera to shoot more professional in a more professional style. There's a company that makes really good mirrorless cameras, and their phone division kind of lives under their main camera division, and they make a line of phones that you would want to consider. And they also come with really fun tools, things like proper rack focusing, like you can program in a really nice focus transition over a period of time, even into like really kind of exotic features for phones, like shooting 4K at 120 frames per second so you can get beautiful, really crisp, high resolution, slow motion footage for your projects. I would be a part of that talking point, because that kind of phone would also, you would want to have things like upgradable storage. You could pop in a memory card or a headphone jack so that you can monitor what you're shooting or attach a microphone. And then as your needs grew, you could then turn that phone into like a monitor for a nicer camera. You could plug in an HDMI cable and get an even better tool to help facilitate your video content production. That's the kind of addition that a camera-focused conversation would bring to the table, if we're saying like, oh, it really matters if you're trying to shoot a short film that you have the best tools available to you. There is a solution for that. There is a company that makes that kind of phone. And I just want to cycle back to one other thing that was mentioned over the last 5 years. It's kind of a biggie, because until this year, you have not been able to completely lock exposure on an iPhone, no matter what camera app you use. If frame rate drift is to be considered a deal breaker, I think exposure drift is also kind of a deal breaker for professional use. Now, Sony suffers neither of these issues, but I also did want to kind of take them at their most critical, because I feel the phone that does exhibit this problem the worst is the Pixel. The Pixel 8 Pro does exhibit some frame rate shift, and it's very frustrating to me that this phone sort of sets out to capture a 24 frame per second video, not a 23 frame per second video, 23.97. If we're going clip by clip and we're really, really particular about like the audio lining up exactly with our lip flap, I know that can be frustrating. I got my start as an audio guy, and I have nightmares still about some of the projects, especially when we started shooting on DSLRs, where subtle shifts in like frame rate or in sample rate in our audio could throw off an entire project, and I would have to sit there and sync like waveform by waveform. If you'd like, you can see me on camera in the ABCs of Death, Q is for Quack, where I'm playing Juan the Sound Guy, but I really was running sound on that short film. The Pixel absolutely exhibits this problem the worst, but what does that look like as it manifests when you're trying to edit in one of these projects? One of the ways that I would maybe demonstrate this is by doing a really long form video test. I also do my own podcast. It's like tech politics and smartphone reviews and stuff like that. It regularly runs over 2 hours long. So I set this up, shot 24 frames per second. I recorded audio from my little Rode Wireless Go, a very consumery kind of pairing for phone and microphone. And over 2 hours, I synced it up in DaVinci Resolve, and over 2 hours of audio later, the video and audio sync together like this. So JGJ, how are your adventures going on Linux? Unfortunately, I hit a brick wall. I was trying to build a Linux machine to take over for my Plex duties, and I really wanted to use it as an image server, but the way that Linux handles drive mapping is insanely frustrating. So I've now gone through 3 different Linux distros trying to find a solution to map my network drives. On Windows, Windows is really bad at being a headless server. I cannot account for any individual moment-to-moment changes that might occur, but my actual editing workflow was extremely fast. I did the auto tool in DaVinci Resolve. It synced up the photo, it synced up the video and the audio. And if there is any issues, because I have a couple other mics that drift just a little bit more, and you definitely can't use them for stuff like this, DaVinci will say, I can't sync the audio and the video together. It's totally a pain. I'm not trying to minimize that, but getting a 24 frame per second video and syncing audio from an external source, and then doing a transcode down to a 2397 just to get it to fit into another proper timeline from another camera is a minutes out of my day kind of experience, not something that completely breaks projects like back in the day, whereas sample goof or some kind of clock mismatch or some other kind of error would result in days of work to get a project back up to speed. Now again, it really depends on how precious down to the 10th of a frame you care about the lip flap in your video, but I haven't found where it's so destructive or so problematic that this is going to be a problem. There are solutions if they take just a little bit more work to get there.
Yeah.
I mean, Apple did so much in the back end of their phones, which is very impressive. Like, you know, they had the same conversation with us where they're like, oh, it's difficult finding the balancing point between how advanced you make your product and how many people in a small minority will appreciate that, and then how you actually make it accessible to the everyday person who just wants to have fun with it. And Apple has actually, ironically, it's like they've made their phones very entry easy, like, you know, low bar kind of stuff to get into, but in the back end their technology has always been there. It's like, yeah, but if you use the right app you can unleash like havoc on the world creatively, and it's amazing.
I like that phrase, but I also want to point out what he just said there too. If you use the right app, and what we know over the last 5 years, if I need to go through and sync audio and really tighten up some lip flap, I can still very quickly, with the tools that we have today, very quickly bounce down to 2397 and with a very good audio sync. I don't know that last year, if I had an iPhone 14 Pro, it would have been as quick or as labor consistent. That was a really funky way to phrase that. It would have been as easy to fix exposure changes because of dynamic tone mapping. You know, Android is so problematic, and we say Android broadly against iPhone broadly, but you know, like even my Xiaomi, again, this is one of the biggest sins for a lot of our Android players, especially from the Asian manufacturers, is pure 24 frames per second, pure 30 frames per second, and pure 60 frames per second in these apps. If I shoot from this phone and I dump it into DaVinci Resolve, it's going to ask me if I want to change the frame rate to pure 60. That is a little annoying that it's not 5994, it's 60 frames per second. But within that drift, if we're talking about a 10th of a frame here or a 10th of a frame there, your ability to lock that audio in with automated tools is really good these days. It's a significant uptick in how quickly we can work through these projects using automation, using these built-in software tools. So you pick up an expensive Android like a Xiaomi, this is the 13 Ultra, and I found it to be remarkably stable at 60, even when we're shooting for longer stretches of video and the phone is starting to run hot. Exactly in those scenarios where Androids used to fall apart a lot more quickly than iPhones would. That consistency of longer clips, well, these newer chips have contributed significantly to improving that stability.
Whereas like other manufacturers seem to kind of been on the same token where they're like, yeah, we're gonna cater to, you know, the everyday user, which makes sense, but we're not gonna worry about like any future proofing for any more advanced stuff going down. And again, there's a lot of Android phones out there. Everybody has different.
There's a lot of Android phones out there, and of course, Android manufacturers, they don't care about future proofing or features or being ahead of other companies. And again, that's just a silly thing to say. The best camera is the one you have with you, and I guess if all you have is a phone garbage camera, then it's not as good as your proper, you know, mirrorless or DSLR. And I'm telling you, camera snobs out there, you're really starting to miss out on some of the most fun bleeding edge camera tech. We know all of these companies, Sony has been very vocal, new technologies are coming to their phone division first, where they're going to work out the most exciting tip of the spear tech, and then it's going to filter into their more traditional photography solutions. Holding up a phone like this, we've got a 1-inch type sensor, which is larger than any of the phones that are properly sold in North America. And it brings a very nice optical look to your photos and videos. It is natural lens focus fall off in a fairly wide, it's a 23mm equivalent lens. So that's definitely an issue for composing some of your content, and you're not going to use it with all 4 cameras. But the other companion sensors are also better than most of the companion sensors for phones that are sold in North America. We're starting to fall behind, and we're really missing what's happening here. Because if you've done your math, you would also know that a 1-inch type sensor on a phone that also does have a variable aperture, which is just pretty sweet to play with. A 1-inch type sensor is starting to close you in on Super 16 film. Super 16 is what was used to shoot movies like Black Swan and The Wrestler. And it's a really interesting look for composing your scene and to create a project that looks a little dirty, it looks a little grimy, it's maybe a bit noisier than shooting 35 or on a larger sensor. Someone who is really anxious about getting the right phone for their needs and learning about how to create content and is, this is the starter camera for their journey into filmmaking. This is a little digital Bolex that fits in your pocket. Super 16 is such a rad look to start learning the language of film and cinema. And this is something that not only shoots that content, but you can edit it pretty well on device. Once we climb up to these 1-inch type sensors, sure, we're dealing with some tricks like quad Bayer and pixel binning technologies, but binning those pixels down, we're starting to get sensor level performance that paces and sometimes outperforms Micro Four Third sensor performance. Obviously, we're not talking about interchangeable lenses, we're talking about the data from the sensor. The pixels here are bigger than some of the newer Lumix cameras out there. So we don't want to just shrug this stuff off. This is something that could be contributing to your workflow and mixing in with the footage and the photos and the videos that you're capturing from more traditional professional solutions. But you can't know that this exists if reviewers aren't going to take the time to properly inform their audience. This is where the future of mobile photography is going, and the United States is kind of a year behind.
Approach, but yeah, I mean, Apple, man, they were like, yeah, why not have a phone that can do really nice cinematic video?
Yeah, and why not have a phone that does really nice video, but you can't control the exposure on it unless you shoot log? That's pretty nifty too. I love going through videos and trying to change exposure and match scenes for consistency, even though I locked those exposure values in my camera app.
Not everybody's going to use it, but why not?
Jaron, can I request immediately a line of t-shirts that say unleash havoc on the world, creatively, period? I'd wear that.
I would give you money for that shirt. Please make that. That is a rad t-shirt idea. Put it on a shirt. I need it on a sticker, and I'll also buy your hat when you make
put that on the list.
That's really good,
we're thinking about merch right now. So if you, by the way, anyone listening to this, if you have suggestions on who a good merch partner would be, like for clothing, basically,
I'm so bad
please
at
let
the
us know.
merch
It is the wild west of trying to figure out what a good option is. So if you've got ideas, share them.
Right.
On that note.
Yep. Okay. So they're moving on here. These reaction videos. I don't understand how people make careers out of this stuff. For folks out there who would want to play with some crazy Android technology, I think it's fair to say if you have to use an app like the Blackmagic camera app on an iPhone to have more control over your footage, you can also play with apps like Motion Camera or MC24 FPS on Android devices. Motion is really interesting, and we're seeing that Motion is being used by like Samsung when they're shooting these like professional grade projects, because you can pull the raw image data off of the sensor. They're huge file sizes, and it captures the full 4:3 image sensor. It's really fun to play with. I've never needed it in one of my professional projects, but it's pretty cool tech. We're getting out of this segment now, and I kind of feel like halfway through the segment, we got a really good answer. This is kind of the world that we live in with smartphones and how features improve and we iterate on different ideas. Now, speaking directly to our podcast hosts here, guys, I love this podcast. your insights on cameras and photography and cinematography, I mean, the camaraderie that you bring and the conversations that you get into, your show is second to none. There are precious few opportunities for enthusiasts to really dig into conversations like these. Your show is a must listen every week, but I get it. Your team likes Apple. That's fine, and it's a more profitable topic to cover. But I worry you're starting to miss some really important information for your readers and your viewers, because Android is not one thing. And unlike the iPhone, with Android, we do have a conversation about better specialization. If you want a gaming phone, if you want a productivity and work phone, if you want a camera-focused device, we have options that are not reflected in a better or not better iPhone-style conversation. The space is not solely defined by Samsung or even Google, because we have choice and because we have competition. If we're going to say that the phone in your pocket can be used for a higher degree of creative work, then it's even more important that we step up and we show those practical differences, especially on the phones that are not available in the United States. How can Americans know what to demand of the next iPhone or Galaxy or Pixel if we don't appropriately show the bleeding edge technology that's in a Xiaomi or a Vivo or an Oppo? So I'm happy to see that these phones will sometimes get a write-up or a review. You'll regularly publish the press releases on PetaPixel, but when those phones are reviewed, you can tell. I mean, it's pretty apparent that the reviewer really doesn't live with Android cameras. Important details are overlooked, or there are just outright mistakes in reporting on features and capabilities of these less familiar phones. I've been on so many different publications. I totally get it. The monetization of how we create content in the year 2024 is super precious. Apple and Samsung bring in more search traffic for a mostly English-speaking North American audience. But North American phones are falling behind the rest of the world for optics and new camera technology. This podcast is so fun, guys. Every week, I'm excited to see a new episode drop. But moving forward, I'm probably going to skip your next phone-focused conversation. I feel you guys need a little help there. You should reach out and contact some other reviewers and just kind of broaden some of this discussion. Oh, and also, for anyone who caught this reaction video, if you even watched it this far, if you care about cameras at all, I am highly endorsing the PetaPixel podcast, and you really should subscribe, give them a listen. I think you're going to have a lot of fun, and there aren't very many opportunities to have that enthusiast conversation anymore. Check them out and buy their new shirt when they unleash that new shirt on their audience. Okay, folks, I gotta wrap this up. Thanks so much for watching, for subscribing to this channel, for sharing these videos, however you like to support your favorite YouTubers and content creators. I hope you've enjoyed this conversation, and I'll catch you all on the next... Well, I don't do reaction videos, so I'll catch you all on the next video.